Hello, my name's James Marland, and in this short video I'll be introducing the automotive value chain, which is just a fancy idea which explains how that car on your drive got designed, built and sold to you. So let's go back a bit. Let's go back to Carl Benz, who actually invented the automobile in 1880. And old Carl, well, he had to play all of these roles. The owner, the driver, he was the designer, the financier, the manufacturer, the purchaser, and the assembler. So now let's advance 140 years, and this is Alex, and she wants to get a new car. So now I'm going to explain the companies and the stakeholders that will be called upon to deliver this car to Alex. So let's start with some familiar characters, some of the most famous brands in the world. The global car industry has had a stable list of automotive companies throughout the years. So here's the first new word you need to learn. It's OEM. It actually stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. Not a very helpful term, I admit. But the good news is these are all familiar companies. Honda, VW, Ford, etc. But Alex, she can't just walk down to the VW factory in Wolfsburg and buy a new car, because there are some other key players. Because most of these OEMs offer an indirect sales model. As Alex does the configuration online, then the web shop will connect to a car dealer who's the channel partner for the OEM sales department. They do the test drive and usually set up the warranty and servicing, and can add aftermarket options like a roof rack or snow chains, and do the legal paperwork. And the dealer also deals with the fact that Alex doesn't typically show up with a bag of cash. And so this brings in the financing, either as a loan, a lease, or a combination of the two. And this ends the demand value chain, the selling. But in order to sell something, you have to have something to sell, the supply chain. And that's where we'll go next. If we return to how Alex actually chooses the car, the configuration that she chooses will influence which of the components will actually go into the car. The OEM, remember that word? Well, VW in this case, they're responsible for the final assembly, the quality and the testing of the vehicle. But they don't make most of these components. For example, the navigation option selected by Alex is made by TomTom, and the braking system is made by Bosch. So as Alex thinks about the car that she wants to drive, she's then able to pick the actual configurations for the car. And these choices could include the wheel rims, whether it's manual or automatic, or something as significant as the engine, petrol or diesel, hybrid or electric. And of course there are dependencies between these. So all of the possible components get cut down from a wish list called 150% bill of materials to the actual components for Alex's car. Now, if Alex were actually baking a cake, she could sort of put all of the ingredients into a bowl and mix them up and then bake it. But it turns out that's not actually how you build a car, because the factory is building many cars at the same time, and it's trying to make sure that the red seat goes into the red car and the blue seat goes into the blue car. And this is called the JIS, or just in sequence. So let's go back to the choices that Alex has chosen. She's chosen the blue car, so the trim and the panels and the seat have to be blue. And this is the full bill of materials, the list of components to build her car. So, short interlude here, so bear with me. In the ocean, imagine when you open an oyster and you find a pearl. Each pearl is unique. And cars are the same way. If you go out to your car right now and look very carefully on the windscreen, you'll see a series of lines there. This is a barcode, in fact, and it's called the VIN, or Vehicle Identification Number. And it's this code that the OEM and the key suppliers use to uniquely describe each vehicle. And let's now go back to the factory to see where Alex's car is being assembled. So it all starts with a planning team which develops the production plan. This is the sequence that the cars will be built in. Now this plan must be communicated to all of the suppliers so they know what to send and when. And there it is, there's Alex's car, the blue one, with the options that she's chosen. So now let's talk about the sequencing of some of the production elements. The panels are pressed into the right shape for the model selected in the body shop, and then they're moved to a different part of the factory for painting in the sky blue that Alex has chosen. And the paint shop knows which color to choose based on that VIN number, which has been stamped on the chassis. So by referring to the original order, they know that chassis number 101 has to be painted blue. And just like that pearl, every one of these VINs is unique. So now let's move further on down the production line, because there's plenty more to do to this car. And we'll just focus on 3 of the work centers. The first is where the engine and the powertrain is attached to the chassis. And here come the chassis down the line. See, they've already been painted differently, and their unique VIN numbers link back to the orders. Now, these components are, the engine and powertrain, are complex, and they're made off-site at other factories owned by the OEM, since things like engines are big and expensive, and it's too complex to stockpile lots of them, so they're made off-site. And these have been built from the same schedule, and then moved to the final assembly line, and each engine is referenced by the car it's supposed to go in. And so now the correct engine and transmission can be inserted. Now moving on down the line, we're ready to add the headlamps after the things like the wiring assembly has been put in. And here come the cars, a bit more complete now. And although each car may be unique, at this workstation, the lamps to be fitted are actually identical. And no OEM has the expertise to make everything that's needed in a car, and so these come from an external supplier. And these are called Tier 1 suppliers, and I'll come back to the significance of that name in a moment. And most OEMs have dozens of Tier 1 suppliers. And this is where things get complicated, because there isn't room on the production line for the stacks of components. So this production schedule here has been shared with the supplier, who've arranged for hourly delivery of 100 lamps every hour straight to the line. And here we can see the 10 o'clock and the 11 o'clock delivery of these lamps. Okay, now one last work center, and this one will say it's for the steering wheel. And here come those cars again. And now the steering wheel again is made by an external supplier, different one. But this one's actually configurable. Now Alex has chosen a blue steering wheel cover. And so the trucks for this supplier, they can't just deliver 100 at a time like the lights, because the wrong wheel would end up in the wrong car. Or alternatively, a worker would have to hunt through the paperwork trying to find the right one each time a car came past. And so here are the wheels matched up with the right vehicles so they can be quickly fitted. We can now see how this is done by looking at the next truck in the delivery bay. And we can see that the supplier has sequenced the components to exactly match the configurations of the next 4 vehicles, numbers 103 to 106. And here they're already blue, green, grey and grey, all sequenced ready for the next bodies. It's clever, eh? And so on down the line. Suppliers delivering components, some of which are sequenced according to the configuration, and all delivered according to this schedule. And we keep going until the car is built. So a few bits of terminology in addition to the Tier 1 and OEM that we've already learnt. So this sequencing, where the supplier delivers the component to exactly match the configuration of each vehicle, is called just in sequence, or JIS. And this scheduling of arrivals to match the rate of vehicle throughput in order to minimize on-site inventory, this is called just in time. And we said earlier that each vehicle, like each pearl, is unique. And all of the components providing parts have to exactly match this production line, such as this truck here with its sequence parts. And our German colleagues have a great term for this. They call this Perlenkette, or in English, as we say, a string of pearls. So, we've now spent a lot of time considering the Perlenkette, the string of pearls, and how the parts arrive. But there's more than this, because those parts themselves those steering wheels, those engines and lights need to be made. And this brings us to the topic of the multi-tier supply chain. So let's focus on one of these tier 1 suppliers. Now, many people haven't heard of them because they don't have a B2C business, but they're huge companies, very skilled, like Bosch, Faurecia, or in this example, Valeo, who make lights. And they also have supply chains of their own. For example, a supplier of bulbs such as Philips, housing, and lenses. Now, I said I'd come back to why these companies are called Tier 1, and now maybe you see, because they're buying components and raw materials from their suppliers, whom we call Tier 2. Now, if you recall the string of pearls, this Tier 1, the maker of the lamp unit, they receive a forecast from the OEM about how many lamps of each type will be needed over the coming weeks. And they have to break that forecast down to their own suppliers so they can get ready as well. And a process called MRP, essentially a planning process, converts this demand to the individual schedules that these companies will need based on lead times and safety stocks. And these suppliers need to confirm that they have the capacity because the OEM is requiring just-in-time delivery, and it's unthinkable not to be able to deliver on time and stop a production line. And that all requires these Tier 2s to consider their own capabilities, probably involving the next tier, the Tier 3s. Down at this level, suppliers can be just about anyone. I listed out some examples here, and also important to note that services such as design services and tooling providers need to be planned as well. And there's one special service provider that's worth mentioning, logistics providers, since they're crucial and both parties need to manage the logistics providers who physically move the goods, clear customs, and unload at the customer. And one last thing to note is that this process, and maybe even these suppliers themselves, depend very heavily on which OEM is involved. And so the process for delivery to VW may be very different from the process to Daimler or BMW. So let's come back to where we started. Alex wanted a new car. And thanks to all of the processes, companies, and the Perlenkette behind the scenes, she's able to drive off into the sunset. Thanks very much.